Chris, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, pretty good.
Okay, cool. All right. But we were talking and we were considering, like, what if we called the wrong Kevin Moss? And he was like, oh, you guys want to talk about Guided by Voices? I know all about Guided by Voices. And we would do the podcast with another Kevin Moss, not yourself. And or someone that had like this. Yeah.
We would call this Kevin Moss too. We'd have two Kevin Mosses, and then we would, and then they could just do the podcast from here on out, and we could just be managers.
There you go. Two Kevins.
Amazing stuff. Yeah. So how's everything going up in Ohio, man?
Oh, I'm sure same as you guys. We're quarantining and staying inside and watching movies and stuff.
Yeah, I feel that. Yep, same with us. We haven't really gotten together to record because usually I go over to Chris's place. The room that he's in right now is where we do our recording every episode. He's a studio there, but it's actually a pretty awesome studio. But yeah, we haven't actually because of the current climate of what's going on, we haven't been able to get together. And this is only the second episode we've done since the quarantine started. We did like a YouTube one. I don't know if you caught that one, but yeah, I'm really glad we're kind of getting back on the saddle because I really do miss this, Chris. I don't know if you can. I'm sure you can agree with me, but
no, I hate talking to you about music, bro. This has been, of course, man. It's been terrible. I mean, it's like. This is it's not just a habit, it's something I really look forward to, I haven't missed the pain in the ass of editing the thing. I will tell you that, that I haven't missed, but that's why I'm kind of looking forward to, because we're doing this new process here, and we're doing cold open still. So are we going to say we started or
I think we started. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. You cool with that, Kev? You sign off on that cold open, so to speak?
Sure.
Yeah, so it's begun. This is going to be a little tricky from an editing standpoint because we don't have like 3 tracks for me to cut from or whatever. It's going to be a different animal, but I think it'll be all right.
So I just want to take a quick minute to introduce our guest, who you've already heard, gentleman by the name of Kevin Moss, who is contacting us from Cincinnati, Ohio, deep in Norwood. And he is joining us for our talk on Guided by Voices today. And just a little bit about Kevin. He has been doing his own B-movie podcast called Junk Food Dinner for, I think, like 10 years, Kev? Like almost a decade, if not longer?
Yeah, we just celebrated 10 years in March of doing the podcast. Yeah.
Incredible, man.
Man, congratulations. That's incredible.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So he does the podcast with a couple other guys. And they are actually not in Cincy. Am I right about that?
Yeah, we do the same thing. We're over Skype. They're both in California. One guy's in Los Angeles. One guy's
yeah, he's in like NorCal or something.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Parker's in Northern California.
Yeah.
And yeah, we just talk about 3. We each pick a different movie each week. Talk about it. Mostly, like you said, kind of on the B movie, horror, sci-fi, culty edge of things. But we've done, obviously doing it every week for 10 years. We've covered all manner of film. But yeah, we've got over 500 episodes up on our website, which you can go listen to.
That's amazing. We've talked a lot about this podcast, like, what would a movie version of this be? But it sounds like you guys are doing something kind of similar, maybe not year by year, but definitely like... everybody brings something and you talk about it. I mean, that's really cool.
Yeah. It's a really cool format too, because, they break down movies. Each one of the guys picks a movie and they kind of just talk about it. And like, I love that you guys do differ on your opinions some. And I don't know which episode I was listening to, Kev, but it was one where you were like, you said something that totally deviated from the other 2 guys, and I thought it was great. But yeah, there's definitely some healthy debate in there, which I love. So, yeah,
I bet it's got to be with B movies and 500 B movies. So you got to watch like every B movie that someone else is bringing or something. Like,
right?
Yeah. So for the last 10 years, I've watched at least 3 movies a week.
And they're all like, are we talking like 50s and 60s, like Scream Queen, Coleman Francis kind of movies, that kind of thing? Or is it like Mystery Science Theater kind of movies? Or is it more recent horror, like straight to DVD stuff, or a mix? Or
It's everything. I mean, yeah, like I said, over 500 episodes, we've covered a lot. I mean, most of when we first started off, it was a lot of 80s and 90s stuff because that's, what we grew up with. And we say cult and B movies, but I mean, we've done everything. Like a couple weeks ago, we did, the Ice Cube movie Friday, so it's everything. Right. I mean, anything that has somewhat a cult following, we consider it. I mean, we've done super mainstream stuff. We've done, Marvel movies and things like that, but yeah, mostly we focus on like a lot of
like genre movies a lot.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. I can dig it. That's cool. Actually, that sounds. Now I understand how you got to 500 movies, because I was like, if you're gonna do 500 episodes or whatever on, I don't know, the old the Manos, the Hands of Fate or something, the Mystery Science Theater type movies, I would think you were insane.
And we do stuff like that too, though. I mean, it's a mix for sure.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'll have to definitely check it out, Kevin. If you've been a longtime listener of our podcast, Kevin Moss's name is probably familiar to you because you are possibly the most name-dropped person on our podcast.
You are. Definitely.
It's like you and Paul McCartney. I think it's sort of somewhere in between. It's But so he's been talking about you for a long time, and honestly, he told me a little bit about your podcast, and if I just had more time, I promise I would have checked it out by now. But I'm super, and I told you this via text earlier, but I'm partly stoked to talk about Guided by Voices, although I've got an interesting perspective on that. But I'm excited more than anything just to get a chance to meet you, because you come so highly recommended by our buddy Marty here. So
thanks, man. And to you as well.
And I would say that Kevin and I became friends back in, like 2006, 2007 maybe. And I was coming off the breakup of a serious girlfriend. And we started working together. And I found out that Kevin was like the only person at the place we worked at that like was into cool stuff and liked cool music. And it just turned out that he lived like 2 minutes away from me. So we get to talking, we talk about bands a little bit, and Kevin says, "Hey, do you want to carpool to work?" And I said, "Sure." So basically the rest is history. After that, we became fast friends. And to be completely honest, a lot of my musical taste development came from Kevin, that part of my life, like my late 20s, early 30s. Like, he got me into all kinds of lo-fi garage rock. And of course, the subject we're going to talk about today, Guided by Voices, I wouldn't have really gotten into as much as I did, without the help of Kev. So this is, I feel like, been a long time coming. I'm getting Kevin on an episode, and I'm glad we could do it this way. And we didn't have to wait for him to come to Austin. Not that, Kevin's come to visit me once in Austin, but it's good that we can kind of do this over the Skype and do our thing. So definitely exciting.
Yeah, man. Happy to be here. I like I said, I listen to the show all the time, so I'm excited. And at some point, I do want to come back for a proper episode as well. Absolutely. I would love to talk about the charts from one year and pick an album.
That's a lot of fun. We have fun doing the charts. It's
man,
great.
As soon as this is over, just be thinking about it, man. Figure out a year you want to do, and that we haven't done yet, and we'll slot you in. That'll be easy.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah, man. Definitely will. We'll be happy. You always got a welcome seat here. You got a seat in the mic for Album of the Year podcast anytime you want, Kev. So.
Awesome.
So before we get on to Guided by Voices, how's your music listening changed since the quarantine kicked off for both of you guys? Have you been listening to more music, less music? How's it been? Anything that you've discovered?
Yeah, I've been listening to, so I've been working from home. I have a job, fortunately, that I can do from my house, which is great because I've been listening to a lot of music as I work. I kind of mix it up. I do both vinyl and digital. Obviously, I listen to a lot of stuff over, I have Google Music, which is like the Google equivalent of Spotify. And so I've been listening to a few new things. I listened to the new Strokes album recently.
Oh yeah, what'd you think of that? I haven't gotten a chance to listen to it yet.
It's pretty good.
Okay.
I'm more interested in that than I have been in their last couple albums, but it's been a while since they put anything out, and it's it's not too drastically different. I really liked I don't know if you heard the band that Julian Casablancas had before this called The Voids.
The Voids,
we've talked about them.
Yeah, I really like that album. I thought that was cool, a little departure for him. But yeah, this is kind of more what you'd expect from the Strokes, but it's not bad at all. But yeah, and
I
then
liked there's the one track that they played that sounds like the Dancing with Myself. I don't know what that song is, but they play that on what's our favorite station? KUTX here in town.
KUTX 98.9. Yeah. Great radio station.
I'm not sure about the tune because it is so close to that Billy Idol track, but I loved the way it sounded. It definitely sounded like kind of classic Stroke stuff, so and that's cool. So if the rest of the album is like that, then it's worth checking out. James Rawson was telling me about it, that it was a big record for him. So another one of our good friends.
James is a friend of the podcast and former guest of the show. So that's good. If James recommends it, then I feel like it would be pretty solid. That's cool. So as far as I go, I feel like I've been listening to more music, certainly more records. Craig, as Kevin said, we are both working from home too, Chris and I. So if there's some work I got to bang out that's not a phone call, I'll throw a record on. I'm set up right here by my turntable, so that's nice. And I can kind of put records on at my leisure. And I used to listen to maybe 1 or 2 records a day. I now listen to like 3 or 4, sometimes 5 records a day. So,
that's awesome.
And then like if Courtney and I cook dinner, then she listens to a couple of records while we're cooking dinner, and we kind of switch on and off. So the music consumption has certainly had an uptick since the quarantine for sure. As far as new music, I haven't really listened to a lot of new stuff. I know that Strokes album is out. Everybody's talking about that new Fiona Apple record too, that apparently is real good and stuff. So, haven't gotten a chance to listen to that stuff, but, I revisited the Beastie Boys earlier this week because we watched that Beastie Boys story documentary on Friday. And I've been listening to Ill Communication and Paul's Boutique a lot. So that's another thing I've been I got into too. So yeah. And, I don't know, LCD, I was on I took a 4.5 mile bike ride earlier. And
4.5. Mile. Sorry.
Yeah. 4.5
hour. I think it's a 4.5 hour bike ride. Like, no, what? Man. Oh my God. Someone is going through some stuff. You can take a 4.5 hour bike ride. That's like some heat stroke right there, homie. Yeah, I can't fucks with that. But no, like I throw on LCD Electric Ladyland sessions, which a buddy of mine, some friends of ours, a couple that lives down the street, Sam and Jana, we've been going over to their place to do laundry since the quarantine happened, so we don't have to like go to our laundry facilities at the apartment because it would be a whole ordeal, and we don't know who's been there, that kind of thing. So some friends of ours have been nice enough to let us come to their place and do laundry every few weeks. So Sam was playing this LCD Electric Ladyland sessions, and it's legit. And it's got a lot of stuff from that American Dreams album that I've never. I wasn't really into that when I heard it.
Really,
yeah.
A couple of tracks on it are good, and like these sessions are really like heavy and stuff too. So I was digging that on my bike ride. So yeah, that was pretty cool. And I've been listening, Kevin. I made a Guided by Voices playlist for Chris just to get him hip to kind of some stuff. I made it on Apple Music though, so I couldn't actually swing it by you because I know you use Google Music. But it's basically everything from B1000 to like Human Amusements at Hourly Rates. That's kind of my wheelhouse when it comes to GBV. So
yeah.
Yeah, that's what I've been listening to on the quarantine when I can listen to music. I'm unlike the two of you guys. I have not been able to listen to much music at all because for me, when I listen to music, mostly is like in the car. You know what I mean? Like in my commute. And I've got 2 small kids. And so, like basically daddy gets off of work and he is instantly teleported home where he is not going to listen to music. He is going to work. And then unfortunately, my role right now at work is very like meeting heavy and very like things where I can't play music in the background. So I have been rocking that GBV playlist when I've had the chance, and it's been very eye-opening, and we'll get into it in a sec. But that's probably the soundtrack of my quarantine right now is Guided by Voices. So, which is cool.
Yeah,
very cool. So without further ado, I think let's try and crack this egg here. So, Guided by Voices is the band we're talking about today, and if you don't know about them, they're a band from Dayton, Ohio. They're led by a very precarious frontman by the name of Robert Pollard, who for all intents and purposes, is like a Renaissance man. He kind of does everything. He's written over 3,000 songs. He's, because of that, Guided by Voices has something like 60 albums or something like that. I don't know an exact number, but
I've got some stats. You want to hear some stats?
Yeah.
I wrote down some stats. I'm the numbers guy today. Okay, here it is. So according to the font of all knowledge, Wikipedia, they have 30 studio albums, 12 compilation albums, 7 video albums. What the fuck's a video album? I don't know, but they made 7 of them. 19 EPs, 6 box sets, and there were some other things in there, like 29 singles or something like that. Obviously, there's probably a lot of crossover here, but even for a band that's been around as long as they have, that is pretty intense, the amount of music that they've put out. And especially when you consider that a lot of times you get bands like the Strokes as a good example, right? They release, 3 or 4 albums in their classic period, or, and there's a couple of others, and then they don't record for a few years, and then maybe they're back with an album or whatever. And that's a 20-year career. You get maybe 7 or 8 albums out of it, right? But these guys, it's like an album a year for 30 years or something. It's
sometimes
crazy.
3 albums per year.
Right. And that ends up being part of the mystique of it. You were talking about Robert Pollard. Part of the mystique is that he is so prolific, and he's maintained his prolific nature this whole time. So.
Maybe precarious was not the right word. I apologize. I may have meant to say prolific, but yeah, he is definitely an enigma as a musician and as a person. So that's kind of, I feel like there's this mythology behind Robert Pollard, Kev. Would you agree with that? Like, do you feel like there's kind of tall tales esque stories that are told around Ohio about Robert Pollard or about people that knew him? Do you think? Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with what you said. His prolificness is, his ability to write so many songs. I mean, and yeah, he is kind of a mysterious guy. Like, he doesn't like, they tour, and they've been doing a lot more touring in recent years than they ever have been. But for a long time, he was very reclusive. He didn't like to go out and tour. He didn't like to leave Ohio. He still lives in Dayton, despite, obviously having a lot of success. He could live wherever. And, and he is the band, he's the only constant member since the beginning. And so I think there is a lot of intrigue about, like, who is this guy? Because, in addition to all of those Guided by Voices albums you talked about, he also releases solo records, side projects. So any given year, and the guy puts out at least 3 or 4 records, whether it's under the Guided by Voices name or himself. So yeah, there's, I think people, especially as their reputation grew, were like, who is this dude? And like, that puts out all these albums and stuff. And like, so I think if there's any sort of mystique around him, I think it's about his songwriting and just kind of who this guy is. Cause once you find out, Robert Pollard's a very normal dude. He is like one of the furthest things from a rock star ever. He's he was a school teacher for many years while he was in
elementary school teacher. Yeah.
Yeah. He's just a regular dude. He was like an athlete in high school and college. Yeah. He was a pitcher for Wright State. And yeah, just a very average Ohio guy, except that he just cranks out songs like nobody's business.
Yeah, I was surprised. There's a video, I guess a documentary from the mid-90s that you sent me, Marty, and I wasn't able to like pay close attention to it. I was doing some other stuff and I had it going on, but I caught a lot of it. And I was surprised that like he kind of sounded a little country. You know what I mean? Not country, but like he sounded like he's not working from class. He's like a working class Ohio dude, which is
absolutely
surprised me. I guess because I expected him to be a little less close to the earth. I expected him to be a little bit more in the clouds. You know what I mean? And I don't think that's true.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that one of the reasons and one of the things that he's known for is kind of singing in a faux British accent. And a lot of that has to do with, his influence being a lot of, British invasion bands, but also he says he does that to hide his hillbilly accent. So.
Yeah.
I didn't really sense that he's got a British accent, although it doesn't sound like a country American accent. But I don't know. Anytime someone sings in an accent that's not like, automatically identifiable as like the standard American accent, they always get accused of singing like a Brit,
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So Kevin, you're a Wright State alumni as well, aren't you? You went to Wright State, correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. So yeah. So Bob Pollard, it's worth mentioning that he pitched the only no-hitter in the history of Wright State's baseball team.
He did. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of wild. So yeah, he was kind of a gifted athlete as well, and taught elementary school for years. But Kevin, I remember this story you told me about kind of meeting him when you DJ'd for the college radio station at Wright State, and you guys had a compilation of local Dayton bands, right?
Yeah, well, I worked at the Wright State radio station as the music director for a couple years while I was in college, and we, as part of a project, we put together like a compilation of just local Dayton bands, and I had a pretty good relationship with our with the dude, a guy at Matador Records, because he would send us a lot of stuff that we would play, and I thought, you know what, I'll just ask, because Guided by Voices were on Matador at the time, and I was like, I'll just ask him if maybe Robert Pollard would want to put a track on here, like thinking that I'm sure he'll say no, but whatever, that's cool. But it is.
You don't know if you don't ask, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, I'll ask Bob. That shouldn't be a problem. And he was nice enough to give us a track off Half Smiles of the Decompose, which hadn't even come out yet. It was slated to come out later that year, and he let us put a clip on the album, which was really exciting. And and then when we finally put it out. And it was, obviously they didn't charge us any money or anything. All they asked was that Bob got 10 copies of the CD, and we were like, yeah, of course. And then when it came time to send him the CDs, I was like, hey, we're in Dayton. I could just drop them off to him. And the rep from Matador kind of laughed, and he was like, yeah, well, he's like, I'll see if Bob's okay with that. And ended up dropping them off to him and meeting him briefly. But yeah, it was
pretty awesome.
So he was living at the Cannery at the time, right, Kevin? That's like it's kind of this like swank apartment complex in downtown Dayton, and he had like a penthouse unit or something. I remember you telling me, and you said that Bob Pollard opened the door, and all you saw was him in a giant record collection. That's what you told me.
Well, he lived in what was probably the nicest apartment in Dayton, which no offense to Dayton, but that's not exactly like
not Central Park West or nothing.
But
really nice loft above a bowling alley. It's fine. It's really great.
But there's pictures you can find online of him and his record collection. It's the kind that you need a ladder for. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
That's really cool. It's so cool that he would even, contribute to something like that, and that you paid him in copies of the album. Like, that's great.
Yeah.
Like, what a record nerd he must be, that he's like, hell yeah, I'm on some compilation. Let's get it. Give me 10 copies. Give it to my friends.
But yeah, I've actually met him a couple times afterwards, and at concerts and at various things. And he's a super personable guy. He's always willing to talk to fans and hang out, and especially they've got a reputation for being heavy drinkers. I think once they're properly lubed up, he's more than happy to hang out and drink a beer with some fans.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you guys said that he was a bit reclusive and didn't like to play out and all that kind of stuff. That doesn't sound like the behavior with fans of a guy who doesn't like to play out. You know what I mean? Like, the guys I know who are reluctant to go out on tour usually don't want to do that kind of stuff. That's the reason they don't want to go. So that's interesting. And I've got a lot of questions about the live act part of it, but before we do that, what's your history with them, Kev? Because I think you got into them first of the three of us, right? Were you like an OG, absolutely, in Ohio, going to those tiny shows, or did you find out about them,
no,
the record? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I didn't find out about Guided by Voices until I got to college. Growing up in high school, I think I was a lot like you guys. Most of my music that I liked came from MTV, basically. That was like my main source of music. So I was into alternative and stuff like that. And
what years are we talking about here? You about our age? A little younger, a little older?
I think I'm a little younger than you. I graduated in 2000.
Okay. Just a little bit.
A couple of years, yeah.
Yeah, so I was in high school mostly, in the late 90s. But yeah, so I get to college, and it's right around the time of like Napster blowing up, and I'm in the dorms. I got that sweet college speed on the
T1 connection, baby.
Yeah.
It was the shit back then, man.
And so it was a perfect storm of, I'm in a dorm room all the time. I've got this new sweet computer, this new sweet internet connection, and Napster is huge. So I'm just downloading like crazy. And this is where I'm like really expanding my musical knowledge. I mean, I'm downloading everything that I can get my hands on. But I'm naturally kind of like leaning towards like more what would I guess you'd call indie rock, college rock kind of stuff, stuff on Matador, like like
Superchunk, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then so I'm learning about these guys, and then I learn about Guided by Voices and stuff. And as I I hear a few songs here or there, and people say, "Oh yeah, that band's from here, or that guy went here," and I'm like, "Oh, that's cool." Not really taking too much about it, but the more I start listening to them, the more I start getting into them. And the thing with Guided by Voices is they take a lot of influences of stuff that I was already into at the time, like British Invasion rock from the 60s. I think Robert Pollard always says his main influences are the 4 Ps. Pop, meaning like pop from like the 60s, like bubblegum pop, and then psych, like psychedelic music, which again I was very into. Prog and punk. And so for me, like that's kind of a perfect storm of the kind of stuff that I was already kind of inclined to already. So they seem like a pretty natural fit. And so I started getting more and more. And like I said, with the advent of downloading, and at this point they didn't have nearly the intimidating discography that they have now, but it was still a lot. But with the advent of Napster, it seemed a little bit more digestible. It's like, okay, I can download this, I can download that. And
I was going to make the joke that you're like, hey, I got this cool T1 connection. What's a band with 1,000 songs I can download right now? Like you picked the right one.
Yeah, exactly. So, I started getting into a lot of this stuff. And so this is about 2000. So, their most recent album at the time was Do the Collapse, and that was kind of like their foray into major label territory. They did
Rick Ocasek produced it, right?
Yeah, so they did 2
albums. I
want
to comment on that real quick because Marty challenged me. He was like, listen to this playlist, and then I want you to figure out which songs Rick Ocasek probably produced on this playlist. And as soon as I heard the tracks off of Do the Collapse, I'm like, there he is. There's Rick.
There it is. Yeah.
So it's not a surprise.
You get like a few beats into Teenage FBI, and you're like, shit.
That was it. Teenage FBI. As soon as it started playing and everything, I was like,
Someone tell me why.
There it is.
Great song.
I like it.
Yeah. So I tend to like the glossier, higher production value GBV. Now, don't get me wrong. I like the lo-fi stuff too, but I think there's a lot of good stuff to be had in that late 90s, early 2000s era. Production value version of Guided by Voices that kind of tried to strike a match with the mainstream or what have you. So I don't know if I'm in the minority there, Kev, but I don't know how you feel about it.
Not at all. And I mean, when I first started getting into them too, I mean, and I think this is for everybody that gets into Guided by Voices, is the major hurdle, especially of getting into their earlier albums, like B1000, Propeller, Alien Lanes, is there is that hurdle to get over where you have to reconcile with the fact that the production quality is just shit. I mean, most of it sounds like it was recorded on a cassette player in a basement because it kind
of was. It was a quarter studio, right?
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of it, was just like a real basic 4-track cassette recorder. If that, sometimes it was literally, some of their stuff is literally recorded on a boombox and a single microphone. And not only is the recording quality poor, but there's like just sloppy editing throughout, especially on things like B1000 and Alien Lanes, where guitars will cut out abruptly, songs will just end with the stopping of the tape, and it as somebody who was used to listening to stuff,
Yeah, slick
people-
90s alternative music production. Even that, which it's funny because there's a good, just because it's a similar era, Nirvana's Nevermind, you listen to it today, it sounds glossy as hell, but at the time it just sounded ripping.
It was raw.
You've never heard anything that raw. And so it's crazy to think that, we already thought we were listening to really raw music, and then Guided by Voices is like several steps beyond that,
It's funny, we were talking about the Strokes earlier, but one of the dudes, I don't know if it was like Albert Hammond Jr. or if it was what's the main guy, Julian, if it was him. I was reading an article in some magazine where he was talking about Guided by Voices, and he was talking about that lo-fi stuff, and he was like, whenever we heard that for the first time, like, we didn't know what it was. Like, it sounded like it was music that was made in the future or something, is what he said. And like, I found that kind of interesting, because I feel like that's a testament to Robert Pollard kind of making something out of nothing, like taking these really raw, archaic music production methods and making these, crazy songs with them. Because I think that when you get down to brass tacks, a lot of that stuff on B1000 and like Propeller is really, like 14 Cheerleader Cold Front, like is great. And, it's the melodies are there, the vocals are there, and it's, the production value is
14 Cheerleader Cold Front sounded to me like a Chris Bell song. It sounded like,
absolutely.
like Big Star.
Absolutely.
And I'm listening to it and I'm like, wow, and they've got that, and yet it has something of its own. And part of it is the way it's recorded. And I get your point, Kevin, about this is something you have to contend with. And I think you're right, but I do have to say, at least from the perspective at least from my perspective as a 41-year-old man who's now who's had an outsider music phase and all this other kind of stuff, like, actually the earlier stuff on that playlist, the Propeller stuff, Alien, that's the stuff that grabbed me. Like, I was listening to that and I'm like, wow, okay, this has like almost like an REM Murmur kind of vibe where it's really like it's very translucent. You can't see through it, but not all the way. And I love that about it. It's got a mood that's kind of unique. And so
absolutely. Chris, what was I don't know if it's a good time to segue into this, but you have an interesting story about your first kind of experience foray into Guided by Voices back whenever you were you'd come back to Austin, right?
No, this is before I left Austin. So there's an intense irony I just realized, which is that I'm probably, of the three of us, all right, no question, I know the least about Guided by Voices by far. I am like Bart Simpson doing his review of Treasure Island right now, where he like looks at the cover and he's like, it's about pirates and they have eye patches, like, don't listen to me when it comes to Guided by Voices. But the irony is I'm probably the one who heard Guided by Voices first of the three of us, because I was looking through the story on this, and it was when I was either late in high school or in college. So either I was in Austin or it was right before I moved to Austin, and I would come down to Austin all the time. And I would get the XL Entertainment magazine, which was, so there's a newspaper in Austin called the Austin Chronicle, and it's just this notorious magazine. It's fantastic. And it's cool. Like, it's the cool alternative press, and it's been around forever here in Austin. Well, the Austin American Statesman, which is a good newspaper, but it's, they have to have their knockoff of the Austin Chronicle, and it was the XL. And they used to have a writer for the XL named Michael Corcoran. And I don't know what he's doing these days, but he's an enormous fan of Guided by Voices. And so I couldn't get the Austin Chronicle reliably. I would bring it home whenever I came to Austin, but my parents did get the Statesman so I could read Michael Corcoran stuff. And he used to talk about Guided by Voices. And of course, I hadn't heard them. They didn't play them even on KNAC, but they did. But I read about them. And I was like, okay, this sounds like a pretty cool band. This guy likes it. And he wrote this story where he was complaining about Rolling Stone. And what I love about this is that this became a joke later from Almost Famous, but this was before Almost Famous. And he had written a review, and it's for a Guided by Voices album for Rolling Stone. And it was for Under the Bushes, Under the Stars, turns out. And he'd just written it. And it was a glowing review about how much he loved the album and all this. And this was like his favorite band, and he finally got a chance to put them out. And Rolling Stone changed his star rating. So literally he submitted it as a 4-star review and they knocked it down to 3. And you can still find it on rollingstone.com. I looked it up the other day, right? And he was complaining about how crap Rolling Stone is and how this was awful, and like he didn't want to write for them now because they're changing his stuff up and everything. And so I was like, yeah, that sucks, like, but who's this Guided by Voices? He really, the way he described them, it was lo-fi, but he also talked about him because let's face it, Guided by Voices fans, like, they're not just a little bit into this band, they're really into it. Yeah, which is good.
How
which
could
is
you
fine.
not be? Yeah,
I get it. Listening to it and getting familiar with it, I understand now the enthusiasm, where that comes from. But the way he described it, I think I walked away thinking it was going to be a little bit more ethereal, kind of Cocteau Twins kind of sounding. So I was like, I'm going to go find this Guided by Voices stuff, because he's been recommending it so hard. So I went downtown Austin to Sound Exchange, the great record store that no longer exists, but it was one of many great record stores in Austin on the drag. What killed it? Those T1 connections, by the way. You guys are talking about the T1s because it's right there on UT, University of Texas campus. And so I heard the guys when they were all going out of business.
The Daniel Johnston mural, where that is, Kev, if I've taken you by that. That's where Sound Exchange was.
So that's part of the cool section of Austin, and it used to be really vibrant with record stores. So I went to Sound Exchange and I was like, okay, I've never heard this band, but I'm getting this recommendation from Michael Corcoran. So I pop it in, and I think it probably was Under the Bushes, Under the Stars. I think it's possible it was something else. I went looking and I was trying to recognize it by the album cover, but this is 1996, 97 sometime. So that would have been the new one.
Yeah.
And I think their albums were kind of rare at that point. Would you say, Kev? Like the older albums, the 80s albums and stuff?
Oh, yeah. The 80s stuff was never really commercially available unless you happen to go to a record store in Dayton in the 80s. But yeah, and then once they got on Scat and then Matador, the stuff became more nationally available.
So I think it was Under the Bushes, Under the Stars, and I popped it in and I listened to it and I was surprised because I was expecting it to sound like the Cocteau Twins, and it didn't. It sounded like, what they sound like. It's great, like sort of fractured lo-fi stuff, and I liked it, but I didn't have a lot of money, and I was like a high school student or a early college student, and I remember having like this heart-to-heart with myself about it, where I was like, okay, this sounds all right, but I'm about to buy a record for $15. That's 5 meals. I'm about to buy a record for $15, basically on the recommendation of one guy at the Austin American-Statesman. Am I ready to do that? And I didn't. I didn't buy it. And I was telling Marty, I was like, and today is my day of reckoning for not buying that record. Because if I'd bought...
you got to talk about Guided by Voices for an hour and a half or however long we go.
And not just that, like, I think I would have loved it. Like I would have a lot to say about Guided by Voices. But I started to feel like, and I have this conversation with myself from time to time where it's like, am I liking this just because I read about it, or do I like it because I really like it? Like how much do you let other people's opinions, like, get into your head, when you try something out new. And I don't know, at least at that particular moment, I decided not to get into it. And I just think it's funny that now I'm paying for it. So, so that's my one Guided by Voices story. So, but yeah, so that's my involvement.
And it's funny you mentioned that because, like, while I didn't start listening to him until I was in college, growing up in Cincinnati, which is just an hour south of Dayton, I feel like I did see their albums in record stores and like maybe even saw people wearing t-shirts, and for some reason I had it in my head, I think because of the name, for some reason I thought they were like a Christian rock band when I would the name like Guided by Voices. For some reason that like rang as Christian to me, and I just thought it was like Jars of Clay or something, and so I was like,
Guided by Voices. Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, Guided by Voices sounds like someone like Son of Sam or something, right? But you're right. Like, I mean, I thought it was like, like being in the dark and following a voice or something like that. I think that's where I got the idea in my head that it would be like the Cocteau Twins, because it is a very evocative name, and I think it's usually on my list when I make a list of like great band names. Like, I'll usually throw Guided by Voices in there. Of course, I'm the kind of asshole who has a list of great band names, but there you go.
Oh man, that's great. So, Kev, do you know if the first 3 or 4, like Sandbox, Devil Between My Toes, Self-Inflicted Aerial Nostalgia. Did those albums get reissued ever? Like, can you buy those on vinyl if you want, or are those still hard to come by?
Yeah, so the 80s and early 90s stuff, yeah, those 4 he made, like, and this is while he's still teaching. He's still, a second grade teacher, and he's printing these up with his own money. And these they're actually kind of interesting because these he would go into a studio, whether it was in Dayton or Cincinnati, and they were really trying to make these legit, but they were all self-financed. They weren't on a label. But yeah, and he pressed up 500 copies of each. Like I said, would maybe mail a few out to various publications, and then the rest would just end up in the local bin, various records.
Been there.
And not really sell. And even then, I in college, I would hear people that would find, copies of Sandbox or Devil Between My Toes, like original copies for like, a couple bucks. I always be like, oh my God. But the only time they've been reissued is after B1000 and Alien Lanes came out. Scat Records, the label that put out B1000, put out a vinyl and CD box set that had Devil Between My Toes.
I remember that. Yeah.
Sandbox, same place the pilot got smashed in Propeller.
So that's probably rare itself at this point.
It is.
Right?
Yeah. I'm fortunate enough to have a copy, but they go for pretty big bucks. And the original versions of any of these go for a lot of bucks. The one that garners the most dollars is Propeller, because the cool thing about that is they printed up 500 on just plain white sleeves, and then each one they decorated.
Oh, I heard that.
So they're all unique, and some of them, like, they just screen printed different stuff on some of them. Like there's one that they literally just glued a folded up 6-pack case from like Miller Lite to, just all kinds of stuff. Some Pollard just drew something on, so they're all different. But original copies of those go for like $5,000 online.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, didn't you say that you were at a show and somebody had one of those original OG propellers, and Bob was at the merch booth and he was like, I remember making that one. Like,
yeah, somebody brought one to have him sign, and yeah, he's like, oh yeah, I remember drinking one night and drawing on that.
He's a visual artist too. He has some really amazing visual art as well. Most of the like exhibitions and stuff.
Yeah, most of the artwork. I mean, he does mostly like collage work, and that's what ends up being a lot of the album covers. Is he'll just do a collage work, usually cutting stuff out of like old National Geographics and stuff like that, and that's usually what ends up. But yeah, he's had art shows and stuff and he has compilation books of his various collages and stuff. So
yeah, totally cool. That's cool. I figured there was. I remember there being something like that. Where there was like a box set of all the old shit. And another thing that I didn't realize too is B1000. When I first heard about Guided by Voices, I thought that B1000 was like their first album. They had 6 albums before B1000, which is crazy. And
I was trying to think. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, you listen to B1000 and it definitely sounds like a first album given the the production value and that kind of thing. But yeah, they had all this, the lion's share of material before that record, which is kind of wild. But
I was trying to think of another band that's like that. Like there are bands where they have 1 or 2 like EPs or a couple of little albums first before they go. But I mean, the Guided by Voices has, did you say 4 albums? And they were kind of active for like 10 years. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty rare. The only other band I could think of is one of my favorite bands from the UK, Pulp, is like that, where they kind of have this whole career before His and Hers, which sounds like a first album, but it's really like their 6th album or something like that. But I can't think of any other band that's really, that I can, not on that scale anyway, you know what I mean? Maybe a band that's cranking a bunch of like quickies out first, but there are a lot of indie bands that then go, I guess, to major labels later in their career, but this is almost going from like being a homemade band to a big label, right? Would you say?
Yeah. Well, that's the interesting thing about it is because, he had been self-financing these records. Mostly like, they hadn't been touring or anything. They're not on a label. They're just a local band, and they're putting out these records. Nobody cares about it in Dayton, and nobody really cares about it anywhere else. And so B1000 was actually gonna almost didn't happen. It was Pollard was ready to pack it up and call it a day, because again, at probably the pressure. He's married at this point. He's got kids. He's a school teacher. He's getting a lot of pressure from his parents. Like, hang up this stupid rock and roll dream. Every year you're taking out another mortgage on your house to finance another 500 records that nobody's buying. And so he tells, I think it was the guy from that owns Used Kids Records in Columbus, Ohio.
Columbus. Great record shop.
He was telling him, he's like, I'm packing it up, man. I can't do anymore. And, nerds and record stores were like the only people that were appreciating these albums. This guy's like,
GBB.
Yeah. And he's like, put together like your best of stuff that you haven't put out. And he's like, I just, cause I know you've got basements of tapes. So put together like a best of for me of stuff, before you guys call it a day. And that ended up being B1000 more or less. And then the guy at Used Kids, I think, passed it along to Scat Records, which is a pretty small independent label. I think they're out of Cleveland.
Yeah.
The only reason I ever knew Scat before this is they were one of the first labels to put out the Jerky Boys.
Are you serious?
Yeah. Before they got really big when they were still underground, when the Jerky Boys were still underground.
The Jerky Boys were underground.
We'll have to have you come back when we do our Jerky Boys anthology. We can talk about that. Yeah.
We're gonna do the Jerky Boys first record.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
But then that's how B1000 came about, and then it really kind of restarted the band, because that, then started getting, because after they did B1000, they Scat, along with a couple other Ohio labels, had a new music conference, part of the CMJ that they do in New York, the College Music Journal. They had a showcase of their bands at CBGB's. And so it was a bunch of Ohio bands like Guided by Voices and Gaunt and New Bomb Turks and stuff like that. It was kind of be like, here's what Ohio has to offer, and it went over really big, and Guided by Voices started to get a lot of attention in, indie rock circles. I mean, it wasn't like they were blowing up mainstream or anything, but they were.
Matadors, that's a big, it's, as far as indies go, that's the label to be on in the mid 90s, right?
Right. That's when they got Matador's attention, and then they signed with them for the next 3 albums. And yeah, so they and then that's when they started to become more well-known outside of the Dayton, Ohio area.
Mm-hmm.
Man, the New Bomb Turks, what an incredible band. Chris, do you know them at all?
No, I don't.
Man, probably the best punk band to ever come out of Ohio. They're like kind of like got like a street punk thing, like a garage punk thing going, and they're from Columbus, and they're just awesome. They actually came and played in Austin. Maybe 6 or 7 years ago. I went out and saw them, and they were still kick ass. Man. They were so good.
This is, since you bring up the Ohio thing, let's pause on the history and tell me a little bit about how you feel. Like you said, you guys are both Ohio boys, Ohioans. Is that?
Yeah.
Do you feel like a kindredness to them because you guys are from the same place, the way, maybe someone here might feel about the 13th Floor Elevators or something like that? Or do you feel like, no, they were obviously built for the world. We're just proud to have kind of been at the place where that kicked off. Like when you listen to Guided by Voices, do you hear an Ohio perspective? I guess I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about that, because I would consider Guided by Voices like my favorite band of all time, which is, I mean, as someone who loves music, that's a lot of times hard to pin down.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if I had to just say which band I've devoted the most hours to and everything, and just overall probably enjoy the most, it is probably Guided by Voices. And so I think about that a lot. It's like, is there a part of me that likes them that much more because they are from Ohio, because, I went to the same college that Robert Pollard went to and all that stuff. And I don't know how much that factors in. I'm sure there's part of it that is, but I don't think it's that much. I think more of it has to do, like I was saying earlier, with just a lot of the influences that Pollard's taking from are things that I like already. I mean, like, he talks about his two favorite bands, and obviously you can hear a big influence are the Beatles and the Who, and that comes through a lot. And those early records, like you talked about, he was obviously very influenced by REM. I think that was a big, and another band that's one of my all-time favorites. So
absolutely,
and like I said, he draws a lot from punk and psychedelic stuff. So I feel like just it's a perfect like mesh of stuff that I was already predisposed to like. So
I can relate to that just listening to Marty's playlist. I made a list of things that I kind of heard in there. I'm just going to kind of go through it real quick. I heard shades of Squeeze, Teenage Fan Club, Nirvana, definitely Supergrass, Superchunk, Oasis, The Cars, Wilco. Even there was a track that reminded me of the Foo Fighters, Chris Bell. And I don't know that he's directly referencing the freaking Foo Fighters or something, but I do think that there are times where listening through that playlist, it doesn't sound like one band's greatest hits even. What it sounds like to me is like a scene's greatest hits. They just all happen to be the same guy who was behind all of them. You know what I mean? Like if you ever get like your compilation that you were talking about, it feels like this is a compilation of like 14 different great bands from some local scene somewhere that, but instead of being 14 different bands, it's just like one band, like that was kind of my take, because there seems to be so many different, I guess, so many influences of things that are great, but also have their own unique thing, and yet they're all kind of in this guided by voices stew.
Right.
Chris, didn't you say that you thought Gold Star for Robot Boy was like they figured out Oasis before Oasis did?
Yeah, I was listening to Gold Star for Robot Boy. I'm like, yeah, Noel Gallagher wishes he wrote this, but even the way he sings it is very Liam Gallagher-esque, and yet I think it's a couple of years before Oasis. And I'm like, well, you guys outdid him, before Definitely Maybe came out, and then it's recorded on a 4-track Porta Studio, which makes it better, I think, so. Totally. Although I'm curious, those early tracks, like you guys have both seen them live, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So on that documentary you sent me, they play a little bit of Gold Star for Robot Boy, and it sounds heavy, and like relative to the original track, which really sounds super compressed and tight and everything. And I was like, wow, that must be quite interesting to hear a lo-fi band, a band that's this lo-fi live. Must feel like you're like the scales are falling off your eyes or something, or off your ears. Does it feel that way, or am I imagining that?
I think that. Go ahead, Kev. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, when they play live, and there's been many iterations of Guided by Voices. I mean, the band that he's touring with now is completely different than the band that was playing in the 90s, totally different than the band that I saw him playing with in the early 2000s. So, I mean, he rotates musicians, and each of the different iterations has kind of a different sound when they play live, but most of it is, they kind of rock a lot of the songs up. But I think it's fun. I mean, one of the things that I love about them, besides their great albums, is that they do put on a great live show, and it's very high energy. It's usually very drunken, both the audience and the people on stage, and it's just a party. It's a lot of fun. I mean,
that sounds like the Replacements or something.
It very much.
Kind of. Yeah, when I saw him, it was 2010 was the only time I saw him live, and that was when they were touring on the classic lineup. So it was like Bob and like Tobin Sprout, and I think Demos was in it too. Kev, did you see that tour?
Oh yeah.
Greg Demos playing bass and stuff. So that was but before the east side of Austin got completely like gentrified. There was this big field where there's now like mid-rise apartments, and they called that was a music venue called the East Side Drive-In, and that's where the GBV show was. It was just a big field with a stage in the middle of it, and they used to have shows there, and that's where GBV played. And I went with my buddy Norman Boyd, who's about 10 or 15 years older than us, actually, and he's seen GBV, like he saw him at Liberty Lunch and stuff in the early 90s awesome. And stuff. Yeah. So he goes, dude, I've heard that this lineup is just pure magic, and they hit the stage, and it was nothing short of that. And yeah, like Kevin said, their live sound, and since it was the classic lineup, they're playing B1000, Sandbox, Propeller. They're playing a lot of old stuff, And it was quite muscular as far as the live sound goes, the live set. So they weren't trying to kind of like lo-fi you out on a string when they played live. They were, and Bob is such a kind of a dynamo when he plays live. He's jumping around and doing high kicks and like,
wow. Is that Who influence? Yeah.
He has like a rock star attitude. He's not having indie rock. It's not like, no offense, please don't take offense to this, Chris. It's not like seeing like Bell and Sebastian or something.
Right.
Although I'm sure they're very good live.
Sure.
Don't get me wrong. But he's
they're
not
not a
going out there
shoegaze
like,
band. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Bob's going out there like he's the indie rock fucking Motley Crue or some shit. Like he's going for broke. And he's 60 years old still out there doing that, going out and doing high kicks every night and drinking until he falls over. I don't know how he does it, but he keeps it 100. So I would agree with that. Another thing too, I wanted to circle back real quick too about how I feel about Guided by Voices and Bob representing Ohio. And I agree with Kevin, and I think it's the thing about, we sometimes talk about on this podcast how different people and different bands, different musicians like interpret different kinds of music through their experience or their lens. And I feel like Bob and Guided by Voices are interpreting British invasion pop and punk and psych through a working class, Rust Belt, salt of the earth lens. And I think it's possibly the best interpretation that's ever taken on. I think it's something that he's mastered. And I think it's because he's such a prolific songwriter. And he understands music on such a deep level, so that's, I kind of wanted to circle back around and make that point just because I feel like it was worth bringing up. So I don't know if you guys had any thoughts on that, but
I will say one thing, just kind of sticking on the prolific thing, and I know we brought it up a couple times, but the one of the things I like about that is it really appeals to me from the perspective of 2020. I feel like, and we've talked about it before, I feel like bands are afraid to put out an album that's not Thriller. Like that, it's got to be the album that defines your career, or just don't go away and don't put anything out for 5 years and then put out a big album when you should have put out 4 different albums in that time period, And I just respect greatly any bands that are doing the old model, which is just like, let's just get another one out. Let's get another. Look, the last one was okay. Let's get another one out. Oh, that one's really great. Okay, next one. You know what I mean? Like being willing to put something out if it's not, this overproduced, super album or whatever. I think that's really cool,
Yeah, I think it is really cool. But it is one of the things that I think a lot of people kind of criticize him for is that, putting out so much stuff. I've heard people say like, I wish he didn't put out 3 albums a year. I wish he just put out one album of
all the greatest shit.
Yeah. And I know that like reading about him, like when he was on Matador, that was one of their biggest complaints. They're like, hey, listen, we can't promote another album this soon after you just put one out 6 months ago. Like, it's just not in our budget to send out advertising and promote it. And then you've also got this solo record you want us to promote. And then this other like, this just isn't feasible. Just collect the best songs from this and, put out one album next year. And that's just not how he works. And, ever since 2012, when they got back together, they've been strictly independent. Like they are their label. Like all their albums come out on Guided by Voices Inc., GBV Inc. And now that like the restrictions are off, you see what his output would have been like, I think all those years had he not been kind of harnessed by those labels saying like, no, you can't put out that many. Because like now they put out at least an album a year. Like last year, 2019, they put out 3 albums. And like I said, that's outside of, like I said, Robert Pollard's solo side projects and all that other stuff. So he just cranks it out, and I respect that. I mean, that's just the way.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that there's a quality control issue. There's from a marketability standpoint, that's a perfectly reasonable. If I was sitting in a boardroom and I was looking at the money we're spending or whatever, I might have that conversation with Robert Pollard too. But we don't have to think about that. We think about it just as appreciators of art or whatever. I will say it's intimidating. Like the reason I haven't gotten into Guided by Voices at this point, up until now, has just been because of how intimidating it is. I had a guy at work, actually. It turns out I have 2 Guided by Voices stories, Marty, because Austin Miller, I don't know if you ever met him, but he used to work in our department.
No, I don't think so.
Really cool guy, was an analyst, but Guided by Voices is his favorite band. And I asked him, I was like, where do you start? And every time I think Guided by Voices fans, you can tell me if this is true, Kev, but like, I bet they hate that question because it's almost impossible to give an answer, right? Because he was like, well, Mag Earwig is probably, maybe that's where you start, but you could do B1000 and, and he gave me like a list of like 4 or 5 Guided by Voices albums to start with. And then I remember listening to some of Mag Earwig and I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool. I don't know if I'm listening to the right one though, and I think that's kind of always a challenge. It reminds me of The Fall. Do you guys know anything about The Fall?
Oh yeah. Marquis Smith.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if both of those bands are in the same category as like bands that seem whose the size of their catalog is just too intimidating, right? For me,
Right. Yeah, I think that's fair. And that's the tough thing with Guided by Voices. I have friends who like Guided by Voices, and probably consider at least a couple of them B1000 Under the Bushes, Earthquake Glue among like their favorite albums, but they just can't keep up with them, and which is a shame because I think a lot of the stuff that they've put, because so they, for those of you that aren't familiar, at 2004, Robert Pollard calls it quits on Guided by Voices and just focuses solely on solo stuff and side projects, and then they came back in 2012, reunited, like Marty was saying, with the classic lineup, the lineup that they had in the early 90s, and they put out 5 records with that lineup, and then after that they call it quits again in 2014. And
wait, they put out 5 records in 2 years?
Yeah.
Guided by Voices. These guys are awesome.
They call it quits again with the classic lineup, and then Robert Pollard reforms the band with all new guys.
Yeah.
And they've put out like 7 or 8 albums since then.
Yeah.
And I think the new stuff is among their best, especially with this new lineup, because he's got a lot of younger guys in the band, which I think add a lot of energy to it. One of the guys in the band is Bobby Bear Jr., country artist Bobby Bear, and a lot of young guys. And he's got Doug Gillard, who was the guitar player with them through a lot of their late 90s, early 2000s stuff, and I think he's probably one of the best guitar players that has ever played with. It's like the guys Pollard wants to be playing with right now, and he's at a point where now he can pick kind of like the cream of the crop of guys that he wants to play with, and I think they sound great both live and on vinyl. And I think some of the newer records they've put out, particularly like Warp and Woof, which is one that they put out last year, is some of their best stuff that they've released in a long time. So that
actually doesn't surprise me. He seems like the kind of guy who doesn't, if you don't have an off button like that, then you're going to it's law of averages. You're going to release some great stuff, maybe not, but it actually, just knowing what I know, that doesn't surprise me that much. I will say, looking through the list of people who have been in this band, it is pretty daunting. It's like looking at the Drifters or something. At one point, I was like, "Oh, Mitch Mitchell was in this band. Oh, that makes sense. The guy from the Jimi Hendrix Experience." It's like, no, it's a different Mitch Mitchell.
Yeah.
But for a brief second, I was like, yeah, that may at some point, Mitch Mitchell's 100 years old and is playing with the Guided by Voices. Why not?
Right.
So Doug Gillard was in Not a Surf too, right?
Yeah, when he got called to rejoin Guided by Voices, he was actually in Not a Surf and had to say, "Sorry, boys, I got to go."
Sorry, guys.
That's trading up. That is definitely trading up.
Yeah.
I actually like Not a Surf. I think they have. I do
too, but I think Guided by Voices, that's no contest, right?
Well, yeah, of course.
Well, you got a tattoo. Yeah, you're not going to pretend like that's not a trade up.
Well, yeah, and before that, Doug Gillard was in a Cleveland band called Cobra Verde.
Yeah.
And what happened with them was funny because when the classic lineup originally broke up in the 90s, Bob Pollard just went to Cobra Verde and was like, "You guys want to be my backing band?" And just swooped up that whole band, and then they became Guided by Voices.
They were like, "Yeah, of course." It's like if Bob Pollard asks you to do anything, you drop everything you're doing and you do whatever he says. You know, like, hey, I need you to be in Taipei next week. We're going to play a show for the Taiwanese government. I'll be there, Bob. No problem.
I'm still waiting for that call, but when it happens.
I don't know what made me think of Taipei. But
it's just funny.
Weird shit. Anyway.
They're big in Taipei. Yeah.
Oh, huge, man. Huge. I'm telling you. It's crazy.
Well, it is funny. They are, I feel like, pretty popular in Europe. Despite the fact that they almost never play there. Their records are really well received. And I think because they have a lot of that, I mean, that sensibility of kind of European sensibility of psych and prog and stuff in there. And I think Europeans are a little bit more open-minded to this kind of stuff. But yeah, there's a lot of people that I see online clamor for them to play England and to play Italy and to play Germany and stuff. But yeah, Pollard doesn't get out that way.
There's a story about and the guy, the closer you are, the authorized biography of Guided by Voices. There's a story about when they toured Germany for the first time, and Bob hated it. He was like, the beer is too strong. I can't just chug beers on the stage. I can't get pizza or burgers anywhere. Like, whatever they call pizza or burgers over here is not what that is. And like, he couldn't get his mind right the whole time. So I just want to get back to Dayton and go fucking drink at the bar with my buddies.
Yeah.
So funny. Great. And that's another salt of the earth, working class, Rust Belt kind of attitude. And I love it, man. It represents us and our experience in that. So,
well, and that's another thing where I feel like I'm kind of spoiled, is because, you know, I get to see Guided by Voices play a lot because Robert Pollard doesn't like to venture too far from home. And, you know, I'm not very far from Dayton, so he'll play Cincinnati, he'll play Dayton, you know, 2 or 3 times a year. And I feel like, you know, some of the best shows I've ever seen are him. And he feels most at home on his home turf, obviously. And so I feel like I've seen a lot of the best Guided by Voices shows where maybe people that have seen him in Austin or California or something, you know, maybe they're not as on because he has that thing where he doesn't feel comfortable outside of his home base.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's really you see him in Cincy or Dayton or Columbus, like, then that's something special for sure. I've never seen them or him, you know. You've seen Robert Pollard solo, Kev, right? Like, you've seen him play live, just him.
Yep.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Okay. Yeah, and so speaking of their live shows, if I could just mention a few things about that.
Yeah, of course, man.
So it's especially recently. I mean, so the Guided by Voices fandom has, I feel like, grown exponentially in the last 10 years, at least, or, you know, the 20 years that I've kind of known about them. Whereas, like, there are definitely levels of Guided by Voices fans. Like, I feel like I'm pretty high on the fandom scale. Like, I have a ton of their records. I listen to them all the time. But, like, I'm in, like, the Guided by Voices Facebook group, and there are people in there that, like, put me to shame. And, like, there's people that are just obsessed. Like, I feel like there's people that Guided by Voices is the only band they listen to, and, like, they just talk about it constantly. And you know, the typical Guided by Voices fan is, I mean, not to stereotype, but it's a lot of dudes like me. Like, it's middle-aged dudes, you know, white dudes, kind of on the nerdy side. And you know, when they play shows, it is just like a gathering of the juggalos of but it's some of the nicest people, like, and they're way into it, and everyone is there to get, because I think Bob Pollard has a reputation for just drinking heavily. Everyone there is like, you know, tonight we're getting fucked up, man. So, like, everyone's chugging
one on, bro.
Yeah, doing shots and just singing at the top of their lungs to every song. Arms around your sweaty stranger neighbor.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of vibe.
I'm sorry. I was just thinking that sounds kind of like a Guided by Voices song title. Arms around your sweaty stranger.
Yeah, totally.
Next album idea, Bob. That's free.
What he called Bob Up right now. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is a weird experience, just kind of as a side, like when because there are bands out there that inspire that kind of devotion, although I think Guided by Voices is, definitely on a slightly more extreme end, but it is very strange if you're not in that cult or in that group to find yourself at a show like that where everybody is like singing. Like me going to a Guided by Voices show sounds a little like it's going to be a little. We kind of talked about this on the Rush episode, Marty, where it's like I went to that Rush show and I didn't really know anything about Rush, but everybody there is like singing every guitar solo or whatever, and it's yeah.
That's a very apt comparison because I think both those bands have the same percentage of female fans as well, which is 2%. It was funny. Yeah, the joke at the Guided by Voices concert is like there's a line out the door to take a piss in the men's bathroom, and you can hear crickets in the women's bathroom.
That's amazing.
Sometimes that can flip, though. They used to say that about the Pixies too. And then when the Pixies reunited, it was like maybe through the Breeders, women had discovered them, and now Pixie shows are much more 50-50. But
yeah,
so I know Kim Deal was involved.
That the Pixies had a real male,
super masculine back in the 80s. Yeah, I was surprised to learn that too. But I saw Frank Black talking about it, that was a change that happened over time. But
I see them as being a really masculine band. I don't feel like the Pixies come from like a really male place like some other bands.
I don't either.
I don't know. It's whatever. But
yeah, I'm not sure what the phenomenon was there. Maybe they just played too many frat parties coming up. I'm not sure.
At
UMass.
You mentioned Kim Deal, and obviously she's been kind of involved in the Guided by Voices history as, obviously they're from Dayton as well, and her and Pollard were friends for a while, and there's always been somewhat rumors of if they were romantically involved, and apparently they had some sort of falling out where they don't. Yeah. I don't know if it's not that they don't like each other anymore, but they I think, if Kim Deal gets asked about Robert Pollard, she doesn't like to talk about it. So there's a lot of speculation on what exactly the nature of their relationship was. But Robert Pollard and Kim Deal did a duet of the Nazareth song Love Hurts for the Love in a 45 soundtrack. Which,
really?
I'm going to pull rank. That's an Everly Brothers song originally, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. But the Nazareth version is the version.
Well, the one everyone knows is Nazareth, right?
Yeah. There's also a pretty great Roy Orbison version of that song. So,
really?
And my favorite version of it, of course, is Outsider Music. There's a version of it by what's the name of the grant? The Phi Mu Alpha Washboard Band from like 1961. It's amazing. It's the best version of that song you'll ever hear. Sorry, completely unrelated, but I bet Bob Pollard would love that version. I'm just going to say.
No, I love that.
Yeah, you're right. Roy Orbison, 1961, Everly Brothers, 1957, and Joan Jett did a cover of it in 1990, which is interesting. But, yeah.
But find that Washboard Band version because it blows all the others out of the water. I'm telling you.
Uh-oh. We gotta we should start. That should be our next project, Chris. Album of the Year records, where we reissue all this weird outsider music on vinyl, and somebody wants to buy.
Oh yeah. We could just put
somebody out there just wants to buy all the Kit Ream records.
Yeah, we just reissue it. You and me. We'd have the stupidest album cover ever. It would be a vinyl record with our cassette tape logo on it. You're like,
yeah, here you go. We have a record club and stuff. Anyway, I don't mean to get off on a tangent there, but
no, I think it's $1 million.
Yeah. So one of the things in that book that I brought, Kevin, you've read that book, The Closer You Are, the GDV biography.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I found interesting was they used to go drinking. So when Kim and Robert Pollard were hanging out a lot, they used to go drinking at this bar in Dayton called Walnut Hills on Brown Street in South Dayton, which is maybe 4 or 5 blocks from the University of Dayton, where I went to college briefly. And I used to drink at Walnut Hills, not at the same time probably, but I find it interesting that I stepped foot in places that Robert Pollard walked, but in any event, found something funny about how he said that like Kim Deal liked to go to bars and play pool, and Bob hated to play games at bars. He goes, "You go to bars to drink and bullshit." He said. He's like, "I'm not with any games. You go to bars to drink and bullshit. That's what you do at bars." I thought that was so good. And so Bob Pollard, like only he would say something like that. But yeah,
he must be hating quarantine right now. He doesn't get to go drink and bullshit.
For sure. Yeah.
Well, and that's the joke that everybody's making. It's like, how many albums is Robert Pollard going to put out at quarantine? Probably been in his basement recording 50 as we speak.
That's the truth, man.
How does his solo stuff? Is it really like lo-fi, just him, acoustic guitar kind of stuff, or is it?
No, it's great, dude. It's great. In fact, two of my favorite Robert Pollard albums came out around the same time, and they're real. I mean, he's got tons of them, but the ones that I'm thinking of are. Sorry, give me a second. I'm scrolling through Spotify here. Standard Gargoyle Decisions and Coast to Coast Carpet of Love. They both came out in 2007, and they're both amazing. And yeah, no, it's full band. It's, super, like muscular sound. Like it's real good. And maybe not muscular, but I've heard it explained that Standard Gargoyle is kind of like The Who, and Coast to Coast is kind of like the Beatles, or maybe the other way around. But yeah, no, dude. So good. Listen, if you want to listen to those two albums, they're fantastic. So I don't know, Kev, how you feel, but
yeah, for sure, and especially the stuff that he put out after 2004 solo, because that's after Guided by Voices had quote unquote broken up, and so there was a time between like 2006 to 2012 where those solo records. I mean. The only reason
basically Guided by Voices records, you just
he just
wasn't using the name. But at this point, it's kind of like the Pretenders or something, right? The Pretenders are Chrissie Hynde, really, and the Guided by Voices is Bob Pollard. So what's the point of a Chrissie Hynde solo record? It might as well just be a Pretenders record, and kind of same thing here. Would you agree or no?
Totally.
Right.
And the same thing with during that time, he put together a band called the Boston Spaceships, which I think are some of those records are just as good as a lot of the really good Guided by Voices records. Like they put out 5 albums between 2008 and 2011, and that's it's a dude from the Decemberists, I think, on drums, and then and then a guy on bass, and then I think Pollard played guitar on those, and those records are amazing. Like 0 to 99 and Brown Submarine, Let It Beard, like all those albums from Boston Spaceships, I think rival some
Let
of the
It
best.
Beard, so good.
Voices one. So
yeah, they're a 3-piece. So it's Bob, it's John Moen, who was in the Decemberists, and a guy named Chris. Wait, hold on. Chris Solsrenko, who I think was in one of the iterations of Guided by Voices. So
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it'd be awesome.
Yeah, he played bass with Guided by Voices in like the late era Matador years, like the Earthquake.
Right on.
Smiles era. Yeah.
Are there any eras of Guided by Voices where you're like, yeah, I'm just not having this? Oh, there was like a 3-year period where, everything was just too fast or whatever. Is there anything that you're like, as a fan, Kev, that you wouldn't recommend people get down with, or is all of it have some quality to it?
Well, I used to be one of those guys that I didn't like the Do the Collapse Isolation Drills records because they were so slick.
Right.
Which was initially a turn off, but I think a lot of fans, myself included, have really come around to those records because the songs are just so fucking good. Like, especially Isolation Drills and Do the Collapse. But I mean, there's just some like just classic songs on there, and I think it's kind of stupid to judge something on its like slick production quality, especially when the Guided by Voices have had all manner of production quality throughout.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of
I think what sometimes happens, and I think Guided by Voices is an interesting case of this, but like what happens when a band kind of swerves into like production choices that the groups don't, that people don't like, is that people are worried that that's what it's going to be from now on, right?
Yeah.
So when it first comes out, you're like, what is every Guided by Voices record now going to sound like the Cars? Like, I can't abide that. That is not right,
Yeah.
And then when you realize, oh no, it's just like a period of 2 or 3 big, well, it's Guided by Voices, who knows, it might be 10 albums, but like it's a period of time, and then they go and they do something else, and then you're able to appreciate it for what it is, as opposed to being afraid that the thing that you loved about the band is gone forever. Like I see that sometimes happen in any kind of long running project, where something is super controversial, like a swerve. And then when they swerve back, then that thing becomes beloved or at least a cult classic among the fan base.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's definitely how those 2 albums kind of went. And I think a lot of fans were worried too, because, like Do the Collapse has a song on it. One of their singles was called Hold on Hope. And it's like this piano ballad. And it got, like they played it on like an episode of Scrubs, like like a touch scene where like somebody died, and like they had like a song on like in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the TV show at this time, and people were kind of really turned off by that, because a lot of Guided by Voices fans hold them in this like really weird regard, where it's like, this is supposed to be my cool.
Only I'm supposed to know about this. Yeah.
And now they're on Scrubs and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Like I don't know about this, So.
Yeah. No, we've talked about that kind of punk rock attitude before. And as punk as I was as a kid and stuff like that, I actually kind of hate that when it's like, this is my thing and it's only for me. Like I'm definitely, I used to feel that way about bands, but now I'm like extreme the other way, where it's like, if it's really great and good, I want it played everywhere. Like I want like Guided by Voices songs because someone's going to be played on Scrubs. Here's your choice: a really great band like Guided by Voices or Coldplay. What do you want?
Yeah,
you want
exactly.
You want Diane down at the Starbucks listening to Coldplay, or do you want her listening to Guided by Voices? Guided by Voices. Let's go with that. Like I think it's a little
Diane
bit more
down at Starbucks.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more interesting world where Diane is into Exit Flagger than where she's rocking Yellow. You know what I mean? Like that's
Right.
my.
I hate to go off topic, but I don't know if we said this in an episode, but Chris is an admitted Britpop guy, like Blur and Jarvis Cocker, Pulp, all that stuff. And you said that like you wanted that music to catch on in the U.S. so bad, and then it didn't. And then Coldplay comes out with Yellow, and it's a blatant ripoff of all that shit.
That made me so mad because I
deal,
for years I'm like, guys, check this out. Check out Park Life. Check out This Is a Low. Guys, no, seriously, Supergrass. There's so much to this that's good. Check it out. And everyone's just like, yeah, whatever. I'm listening to my Korn record, And I'm like, oh, you bastards! You don't know. There's interesting stuff. And then like finally I kind of get out of my Britpop phase and I'm listening to more like lo-fi indie rock stuff. And then Yellow gets on the radio and it sounds like a total bite of Damon Albarn's style. And I'm just like, okay, now you guys like this. Now you guys like the warmed over, knockoff. I mean, the band is called Coldplay, for goodness sake, like you couldn't name the band like next to naming the band Copycats, like you couldn't, it's like Dead Music, it could be called that, and then, so.
Yeah. Well, and you bring up a good point, and kind of getting back to Guided by Voices, like one of the reasons why I feel like I took to Guided by Voices so quickly and so like enthusiastically when I first got into them is because I was just coming out of that time period where I thought the late 90s, for the most part, was some of the worst music ever. And I know you guys have talked about it. I mean, it just, you look at the Woodstock 99 lineup and there you go. I gotta say, I'm so looking forward to when we handle 1999 because I can't imagine the amount of hate that that's going to flow through me for that 3-hour period, because Woodstock 99 is such an interesting story as a music story, but also as like the nadir of like Western civilization or something. It's just so awful. Yeah, I've had many discussions with friends, and because and this is supposedly like our our high
Yeah,
school
we're
years.
supposed to be excited about that stuff.
Yeah.
I was like a sophomore in college. I was supposed to be in bands playing that crap or something,
Right. And I, not only musically, I think just culturally it was a wasteland. I mean, you had, and I don't want to get off too off topic, but during that time, I mean, just that whole culture, it was like, I don't know, it was all very like bro-y, and like, you had stuff like, it felt like Jerry Springer and like Girls Gone Wild, and like just like part culture, like Eminem, like, which I don't individually hate a lot of these things, but just this whole culture of just like angry white dudes, and like it just felt so toxic. And then like I said, I'm coming out of high school, like, yeah, well, music's done forever. It's Korn and Backstreet Boys forever now. Yeah, and then I hear Guided by Voice. I'm like, oh my God, fucking finally something that I can really latch on to here.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. I mean, I've joked with Marty that sometimes I feel like I didn't get over it. I mean, music got better, and it did, and I did get happier about stuff. But I mean, I think, people say that, your life is defined by choices you make in a very narrow band, like when you're 18 to 22, I mean, you can change, you can have multiple phases in your life, but like those are pretty defining years. And that's just smack dab the Limp Bizkit years, for me. And it's just like, as a musician, it was just very hard. So I wish I had got that Guided by Voices, there were two things that I wish I'd gotten into in the late 90s that I didn't. Guided by Voices and Wilco. I wish those two bands, like if I had known about them, I think I would have been a lot happier.
So the thing that did it to me was Fugazi. Like, as soon as I heard Repeater, I was like, wait a second. Like, no, all this other stuff is complete and utter bullshit. Like, what was I doing with my life, And, I was just like, holy shit. And then, the dominoes start to fall and you start to discover indie rock and all that stuff. But yeah, if it wasn't for Fugazi, I'd be a much different person. But yeah, pretty wild. But,
awesome.
Cool.
Well, hey, do you guys have any more, that you want to say about Guided by Voices?
The only other thing I wanted to say, and maybe Chris, this might be tough for you, but Kev, can you give me like a top 5 Guided by Voices tracks, like top 5 songs?
Oh man. Yeah. I mean, that's tough.
Putting you on the spot. I know, but, if you can't, it's all good. I'm just curious to know.
Okay. Here's what I'll try to do. I'll try to split it up by eras.
Okay, cool. Okay. That works. I like it.
So from the early era, like the 80s era, there is a song that I really love, called Long Distance Man, and it's off of Sandbox. Okay. It's like it's just like a minute 15, and it's very Beatles-esque. I mean, there's no denying the Beatles influence on this one, but it's just like a really great short Beatles-esque pop song called Long Distance Man off Sandbox. I say check that out. The other one I got to mention in the early era, off of Propeller, is the opening track Over the Neptune, Mesh Gear Fox. That's the complete opposite. It's probably one of Guided by Voice's longest songs at 5 minutes and 40 seconds.
Almost 6 minutes long. Yeah.
Yeah. And that is a perfect example of kind of their stadium rock ambitions in a lo-fi package. And I think that is a great tune. And then probably my favorite Guided by Voices album overall is Under the Bushes, Under the Stars. And off
3-star album, by the way. 3-star album. Rolling Stone.
Off
and when it said Under the Bushes, Under the Stars, it was 3 stars. I just was saying it's 3 stars.
Off of that album, there's a great track called Big Boring Wedding.
Yeah,
that I think is well worth checking out. Then in the Matador period, I love Half Smiles of the Decomposed. That was their farewell album before they broke up, and the final track on that album, Huffman Prairie Flying Field, is an absolutely beautiful song, and I feel like Pollard picked it specifically to be the last track on what at the time he thought was going to be his last Guided by Voices album. It's a beautiful send off and a just one of their best tracks ever. And then in terms of new stuff, one of the 3 albums that they put out last year was called Zeppelin Over China.
Over China, yeah. Good one.
There is a song on there called The Rally Boys, which is, will go head to head with any of their anthemic live fist pumpers. And I can't wait to see that, become a live staple once we're able to see live music again.
Yeah, no joke. First GBV show back is going to be a banger, man. I'm telling you what.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, awesome, man. Does that cover everything, or did I?
Yeah.
I think Kevin, I'll let you have the final word. But the one last thing that I would say from the perspective of someone who's just kind of dipping his toe in the waters here, I would tell our audience, those of you who are still with us, especially if you're not familiar with Guided by Voices, thanks for sticking with us. It's interesting to have a conversation about a band you're just learning about for the first time. One thing that I would say, if you're like me and you're just checking it out, don't be intimidated by the size of the catalog. I think, Marty, we will publish your playlist on Spotify.
Yeah, I'll get that together on Spotify for sure.
I've been listening to this playlist for the last couple of weeks, and it really has gotten me excited for this band. I think it's worth checking out. I think it may be a band, and Kevin, you can correct me if you think there's a better way to go about it, but it may be a good band to listen to in a sampler kind of way first, get an idea of what they do with their strengths, and then figure out, hey, where do I want to go from here? Right now, I'm at a point where I'm like, man, I want to check out Propeller. That sounds like a record I'm going to really like. And then maybe I will move on to some different periods of their career. But I think rather than looking for, because they're not a band that has like the one masterpiece album. Sometimes there are bands where they're like, oh, you're going to get into that band, there's one place to start, this album. I'm not saying they haven't done masterpieces, but I don't think they have like just this one definitive record. I think it's too complicated to have that. So maybe getting into a playlist or a compilation of this type is the way to start, and then figure it out from there. Because at least, speaking from my perspective, that's been very rewarding. Yeah,
for sure. And Matador in 2003, shortly before they broke up for the first time, put out a like kind of a greatest hits or best of Guided by Voices album called Human Amusements and Hourly Rates. And while I don't normally recommend like best of albums, like I think this is a band that totally warrants it. And while there's certainly not everything on there, like there's songs on here where I'm like that aren't on there that I'm like, how could they skip this? But it's got 32 songs on it on one CD. And I usually use that as like if I am introducing somebody to Guided by Voices, I'll recommend that first to them because it does cover a good chunk.
Covers a lot, yeah.
Yeah, and there's the songs that are on there, they're all bangers. So if you've never heard them before, that might be a good place to start. Is the Matador best of.
But it's definitely a band where I'm getting the sense that you don't stop there. You know what I mean? It's not like, get this one best of, and then you got it. Like use that as a starting point. That's how I'm going to do it.
Absolutely.
Well, awesome. Well, Kev, thank you so much for joining us, man. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm really glad we got to do this. Really glad we got to talk about Guided by Voices. Great talk, something else to say.
Well, yeah, no, thanks for being on, guys. I could talk about Voices for hours, so this has been a lot of fun.
That's what I figured. I was worried this was going to go much longer, but I think we got a good. It's about an hour and a half that we've been going for, so I think that's pretty good. So I think we'll have enough for a really great conversation here, man. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm loving it, man. I hope we didn't talk over you too much, Kev. I feel like
not at all.
I really expected to disappear into the wallpaper for this, but I actually feel like you guys, it was a good, engaging conversation. I really enjoyed it. And I will say to the listeners, thanks again for sticking with us. I know it's been a while since we've released anything. You know why that is. It's the complications with quarantine, but maybe we figured it out. Maybe we can keep doing this again. I know me and Marty, our enthusiasm hasn't died out. So, Marty, I'll hand it to you to bring us home.
All right, guys. Well, thanks again so much for listening. I just want to say real quick that I hope everybody's doing okay with the quarantine and with COVID. I hope that your friends and your family are safe. We hope, obviously, not just me, that all you guys are doing well and safe and healthy out there. Another thing, too, check out Kevin's podcast, Junk Food Dinner. It is available anywhere you can find podcasts. The guys have a lot of cool stuff they're doing. If you like B movies or just movies in general, it's a great listen. It is definitely worth your time. Yeah, that's about it. So we will catch you guys on the flip for the next episode of Album of the Year podcast, and we will see you then. Thanks, guys.